Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today I want to talk about my day at the CWWK factory. This is a Chinese brand that creates NAS motherboards among other things, and I managed to have a good look around their facilities and talk to a lot of their team while I'm here right now in Shenzhen, China. Now I'm recording this now a short while after the visit because one, I've got my big book of notes here, but two, because I want to make sure I go through it all while it's still very fresh in my mind. But before I go any further, a few massive disclaimers straight out the gate. Number one, CWWK did not invite me out here to China. They didn't invite me here, they didn't pay for me to be here. I am here, and I've mentioned this in other videos, because I came out here just talking with Eddie, it's just us at NAS Compares, to send me out to China for a week and try to visit as many of the Chinese brands that we talk about and visit them and find out more about them, stuff that we like, stuff that we don't. And when I be prepared for this trip, I reached out to Co-Law at CWWK and asked them whether it would be possible to meet up with them and their team, and then I asked if I could see their factories. Now, I've asked this question to a lot of brands in the past, not just those in China either. I've contacted brands Hong Kong, Taiwan, the US, Europe, and in most cases the answer is no. And on a few occasions that I've been invited around these facilities, more often than not, I'm allowed to visit, but I'm not allowed to document. And a lot of the time I can't talk about what I see, I have to sign a bunch of NDAs. This is one of the few occasions I got to go to one of these factories, one, with absolutely free, take photos, take video, do what you want, ask what you want, and two, they have no editorial control over this. There was no NDA, I even saw a bunch of new products, something I'll talk about later on, but more importantly, there was no control over the footage that I could create, and moreover, what you are seeing here. And I'm not paid for it, but I thought it was really important to get that out of the way when we are talking about visiting brands' factories, regardless of wherever in the world they are. So the day started around 10 o'clock in the morning. I was picked up from my hotel, and I was picked up by Co-Law himself, and then there was Mr. Mo, who seems to be pretty much the operations manager of everything that goes on at CWWK. I don't think he's a CEO, but he's certainly in charge of at least one of the buildings I visited. I went to two different buildings, and there was a translator, Randy, and I'll say right now, Randy, if you are watching this, you had a harder job than anyone else today. You not only had to deal with my inane questions and to translate them into Chinese, but you had to deal with around 6 different people's questions back. So again, if this video isn't dedication to anyone other than the brand, I'll tell you right now, Randy, peace out, mate. Now, it's worth highlighting, during the course of the drive, it was around 45 to 50 minutes long, I had a whole list of questions. Now, some of those questions I'll touch on later on in the video, but ultimately, these were centered around 3 main subjects. 1, research and development. 2, distribution and obviously RMAs and issues. And 3, how exactly these products are distributed around the world. And that last one was one I didn't really get a lot of questions on. I saw the logistics facility, something I'll talk about later on, but ultimately it was those first 2 questions that were probably the most important for me. So the first building I went to contained the administration block, sales and logistics, and it was the entrance to the first factory floor. There was multiple, and I went through multiple floors, more on that later on. But I will say, of the 2 buildings I visited, and I'll touch on the second one in the second half of the video, but in this one, I saw no Changwang or CWWK branding anywhere on the outside of the building. I saw lots of signs that indicated it was a production facility, but although I did see staff wearing CWWK logos, and I saw the production facility of which there were multiple runs happening at once in the same building, all running CWWK products, I'm not sure if that was their facility or one that is perhaps shared by others. The other thing I'm going to highlight is my original request to visit their facility was earlier, around about, I think I'd have to double check that because again I'm doing this straight after the view. It was around about somewhere between the 8th and the 10th of February, and today is around the 23rd. I believe it is the 23rd today. I'm going to check that actually. I take that back, it's the 25th. So they weren't given a huge amount of notice, where if other brands had been there with their own pre-planned production runs to get them out of the way. What I'm saying is, although I can't confidently state that it's solely their factory because it was part of a larger block, I will say that I definitely got confidence that the majority of their production is done on those facilities. Now, before I went ahead with the factory tour, I was taken into a meeting room where it was myself and 5 other people and Randy, the translator. And this is where a lot of my early questions were answered. And these are ones that were aggregated, by the way, not only from other CWWK videos, but also the one that I made where I was trying to find out more about CWWK and Topton, because there wasn't a huge amount of information there online. So, number one, for example, are all the products designed in-house? We're so familiar a lot of the time with products that are available on Eastern website, Alibaba, AliExpress, and even Amazon to a point, where it's the same product with about 8 or 9 different brand names there. They confirmed that these products are made in-house by them, and although a lot of their designs are then utilised by other companies afterwards, and in some cases it is official partners and sometimes it's just contractors, they say that all of the designs and products they make are in-house IP. Now, we're going to have to kind of, at least within the context of this video, take them at their word. I've got nothing while I'm on site to prove them wrong, but at the same time I'm in their production facility talking through a translator, so again, I trust what I heard, but you know, we have to at least play devil's advocate here. Next up, support, because let's face it, whether you're in Europe or Australia, Africa, if you're in one of the larger continents there, America, Canada, Mexico and more, you're going to want to know about support there. Now, a lot of the questions I asked did get answers, but they felt very template. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because I've got a written article I'm going to put together with a lot of the transcripts, but ultimately they were putting through that one, anyone that purchases through Alibaba, AliExpress that utilizes the support services, you are talking to CWWK. You're not talking to that intermediary company. And later on I'll talk about repairs and replacements. It's still a blanket 1-year warranty across all of those products, and where possible they do repair the products for return and refurbishment to customers that buy them, rather than immediately replacing them out with a new product every time. Now, I know everyone's going to have mixed feelings about that, because there is the whole e-waste versus that of, I want something that works, it doesn't give me something brand new, but at least they had an answer. Now, there was an administration block in that building. It had, I think, about between 8 and 10 people at individual desks, but I didn't have full confirmation that they were working at CWWK. I got the impression they were, because they were talking a great deal to the team members that I was speaking with, and certainly the second building I'm going to talk about later on, they were definitely CWWK staff. But they were telling me that the teams that were in there were ones that were talking to end users there, and that was being done via their online support forum, via WhatsApp, via email. And again, devil's advocate, we have to take them in at their word, at least in the context of this video and that tour. But what I did see there, peering over people's shoulders in a really unsubtle way, was CWWK domains, seeing CWWK assets there on screens. Now, in terms of the workforce, they said they had around 200 members of staff. I didn't see 200 members of staff when I was there. It was quite early in the morning, but at the same time, I will say that when I was there, across both of the buildings, across all of the different floors, I saw around 90 to 100 people, either within administration on PCs and desktops or within the factory floor there. So I can imagine once you factor in holidays and coverage and stuff like that, or maybe international representation, that they would have more staff than that. So I'm inclined to believe them with their staffing numbers there and about the profile and scale of the company. And talking about profiling and scale, it's worth highlighting that they said they were established in 2015. That was pretty much in line with everything I found online, although I did find some resources at one point that indicated earlier than that, but I don't know if that was just translation issues or it was a different company and it involved into something else. And they did want to make it abundantly clear, and again, we've massive quotation marks, if you will, that all of their production facility is hybrid automated checks and human checks. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but they were really at pains at highlighting that point, that between the automated points they had human junctures. So let's talk about that factory line. Now again, let's get another big fat disclaimer out of the way. As mentioned in another video, I've worked in factories. I've worked in retail, I worked in a health food factory in my teens, my late teens I should say. Shout out to Plasto Foods. That when I worked at these places, every now and then you'd get a bigwig, you'd get someone coming round, someone who was a buyer, someone who was a seller, and you had to clean up, you had to tidy up, you had to be on your best behaviour. So I understand that no doubt them knowing that I was coming was almost certainly going to be cause for them to try to make the shiniest version of events that they could. So I'm not going to go rose-tinted glass about this, but I will say broadly, in almost all of the ways, I was pleased with what I saw, but not everything. So let's crack on and talk about that. For a start, the tour was clearly on rails. When I was walking around, I was being shuffled within a group around the factory. Now, my translator, Randy, was taking photos and video for me, and a lot of the time he was not tech-minded, and I've gone through my reels afterwards, and he took loads of photos, and more importantly, the videos he took were at the larger facility around me, where he wasn't being monitored. And moreover, when I was doing videos and shots, I've got plenty of footage of the surrounding area, not just the bits they wanted to show me immediately in front of me. And what I saw, I was more than happy with. I saw people working around me. I saw people, more importantly, at workstations where there was clear wear and tear on the floor around the area they were working in and the desks that were being worked at. Now, why is that important? Well, it's one thing for everyone to look shiny wearing lab coats that have still got ironed creases in them, and I get it. They come from, laundry services. They're probably arriving every day. Of course, they're going to have creases in them. They're going to not wash their own uniforms. But at the same time, they're not going to be able to show me desk stations to say someone's always working here and there's no wear and tear. What I saw was people at workstations that had clear evidence that people work there on a daily basis between the automated facilities. I saw the placement of the CPUs, that I saw the cleaning, the thermo tunnel there they had when they was enduring great heats on the motherboards there, the placement of the individual component onto the motherboards there. I saw all of those components going onto the board successfully, and I might add, when the automated processes were being done, it was being handed through to humans in between. Now, let's talk a little bit about those people in between. Number one, I wasn't able to interview any of those people. Now, they didn't flat out tell me I couldn't talk to them. The problem was the language barrier. I tried to speak to a few people there, and they either responded very abruptly in Chinese or didn't answer at all. Now, make of that what you will. I am not going to be overly negative about that. These are people at work, and some knobber from the other side of the world has turned up with a camera in his hand. So I'm not going to be overly critical. I am not some high-end journo. But what I will say is, when I did speak to people there, it was like laughy and smiley. It wasn't downtrodden masses. So again, I'm going to have to say again, make of that what you want to. But where there was some of those human points in the production run where it would perhaps go to another area, they had 3 separate production runs happening in the same large floor, and there was multiple floors. But what was really interesting is a couple of the human points where it was checks and the placement of components was a few things. Number one, between certain workstations, there were automated trolleys that were taking components. Hopefully there's one on screen. I managed to get a capture of one. And when that was happening, you wouldn't be able to run that service via that automated track to take components that had their CPU placement and some of the early components onto the PCB and get them onto the next run, unless that human was manually putting it on the trolley. There was no automated arm, there was no flat out onto the bed. That is another one of those things that indicated that their heavily indicated automated into human checks was legitimate, because the production run just wouldn't have worked otherwise. Other things I'll point out, throughout the production run, I was trying to make note of several things. Number one, if there was an inconsistency or an error on the board, would it get picked up? And I only managed to capture one. Hopefully I've got it on screen, where there was a motherboard passing through and one of the SATA ports was misplaced. It was at an angle, it wasn't on there. Now, I didn't say anything aloud. I recorded it while it was moving along a production line. I just pretended I was just doing B-roll, but I made a note of that one going along. And later on, I saw the person who captured that board and sent it back round. So they were manually checking it. Again, this is one instance in a million, it proves nothing, but I will say that I saw an error on a board and I saw someone doing something about it. Again, make of that what you will. Now, at numerous points I had to pass through dust-free air shower locks. Now, these are basically air locks to remove unwanted dust and particles into the operating environment, and we were all wearing hats and bags on our feet and coats, by the way, that didn't fit me at all, but that's my fault. I could cut down on the cheeseburgers. But I will say that for the most part I was really impressed by going through the airlocks, and it felt like they were taking it seriously. That's not representative of every day when I'm not there, but I will say there was still a few members of staff and team around who weren't fully covered the way I was. It was clearly one of those, everyone's supposed to do it, but there was elasticity around some of those rules. I'm not saying that everyone was sitting there in Hawaiian shorts, but there was just a couple of guys who had clearly realised that they should be wearing a jacket and they weren't. And again, I don't think that was representative of the entire workforce, but there was definitely a couple of people there. I don't know their seniority level. And along the production run of everyone working, at first I was kind of alarmed that everyone seemed to be clipped in and wired in, but it became abundantly clear that those clips and wires were anti-static measures there when people were going along the production run. It was just a cable running from the wrist and just a single, crocodile clip there at the top. So again, it was just little things like that I liked seeing. But I will say at the same time, and I know some of this may come down to a cultural difference, some of the messages on the walls were awfully stern. I was trying to use Google Translate to translate some of them, and there was a couple of messages on there that basically boiled down to your mistakes are our mistakes and you represent the company, that kind of stuff. And again, I understand cultural differences there, but I just wanted to highlight those messages there on the wall. And as you went into the second building, there was lots of more aspirational stuff, but how many of those messages were CWWK and how many of them were the general factory buildings, which again, I'm still not 100% convinced that it's just them using it, remains to be seen. Next up, test and repairs. Now, they had whole blocks there. One was another addition to the test area and the RMA support, and it had 4 to 6, I think it had 4 guys there, and there were 6 desks, or 6 desks, and I'm sure the footage there on screen, 6 guys and 8 desks or whatever. But the number of guys that were there were clearly working on responses regarding email issues that they were receiving with regards to production issues or software issues of things that weren't running on the board. Definitely BIOS related, I think at least one of them, because at least 2 of them were running BIOS screenshots from emails they were opening up there. Again, I didn't pry in too much into it, notwithstanding there probably isn't GDPR here. It just seemed rude to do that. But behind them was a repair centre, and the repair centre had about 7 workstations, and there was 2 people there and 2 people on lunch. Their stuff was there, but they'd nipped out for lunch. But in the corner there was CPU resetting taking place. There was another bit where they were resetting where the sodium connector was going back onto a board, where either someone had received a board where a component wasn't placed well, or there was some sort of fault. Again, this is not indicative of their products. We've all bought enough electronics in our life to know that mass production technique is not 100%, but it was still nonetheless nice to see it within that working environment. Also, I would say in that area, although the guys I saw in that section of the building that was connected via a few doors to the production area were not wearing the lab coats, I will say that those guys probably didn't need to, because they were dealing with components that had already been used and come in via the logistics entrance. Now, after that, we made our way to the second building. And again, this is the one that I'm 100% certain is owned and ran by CWWK themselves, notwithstanding the giant board that was outside showing their name. On top of that, every floor had indications and accolades and more about their product line, their successes, licenses and stuff like that. They were all decorated everywhere. They clearly weren't just put up. There was dust on them, you could see. Now, when this was in the Beta Industrial Park, again, I had to rely a lot on Google Translate and a VPN for that. Again, shout out to Nord, no sponsor this time. I will say the first thing that I liked, they had a product room. So there was a room that you went in surrounded by glass cases that had pretty much every product they have. Now, this isn't the first company I visited here in Shenzhen. This seems to be a very common thing here, where you go into these buildings and every single product they've ever made is in one room. There's like one version, bang, bang, bang. Presumably it's there to sort of show off the products to potential buyers perhaps, but this was very much their research and development and marketing team section. It was a multi-floored building. We went through a few of the floors, but this is where they started showing off some of the new products, either ones that have just been released, but more importantly, the ones that are just coming out in the next few months. Now, they asked me, and this is what I mean about the thing I wasn't really allowed to show that much of. A lot of these products I wasn't able to get much of an opening on to discuss with you. I'm going to be reviewing them no doubt in a few months' time, but I did ask that I could show at least small clips of them here in the video to at least give some indication that they are dynamic, that they are doing something. I didn't just want to go to a building, see a bunch of people sitting down and think, oh well, admin. So straight away, one of the most interesting products that they were showing me was these new micro and mini ITX motherboards and MATX motherboards that, although they do still feature M.2 and PCIe slots and very, very few SATA ports, they're taking advantage of new kinds of connection within their motherboard environment. We've already seen a lot of those SFF ports that go out into 4 SATA, and they've got more and more of those. So on the MATX, for example, there was 3 of those connected on board, but they're taking advantage of SFF 8654 on ×6 speed. I've never seen ×6 speed used. I saw it annotated on the motherboards, but ultimately on both the Gen 3 and Gen 4 instances, they were utilizing these connectors in either single connections on the smaller motherboards or dual connections on the larger motherboards to add upgrade cards and sister boards. Ultimately, what they're trying to design towards is a flexible NAS system where you get the motherboard in one of the 3 different profiles and then you scale out according to your needs. So for example, they were showing me a 6 times M.2 NVMe upgrade card that connected one of them via the SFF connection, the standard one that we talked about before, and the other one via SFF 8654. That was also then partnered with a board that had 6 SATA connectors, and then on the back 2 M.2 boards. That would allow you to start on a nice base level and scale upwards. And this went to U.2, U.3, and it was just lots of different scale out. And this is kind of their next big thing. Now, when they took me through to Mr. Mo's office, he started showing me off a lot of the 3D graphics and showing how they work out the lane distribution, how they work out the inputs of each of the individual connections, ultimately just showing the placement and then showing me some of the cases that these can be deployed within, whether it is they're using a bended style or a side-by-side style with different cable lengths as well. It was really, really intriguing. And I would say of all of the brands that I visited while I've been here in Shenzhen, and I'm only here for a couple more days at the time of recording this, there was a level of enthusiasm from him and his colleagues that I genuinely don't think I could match on this subject. So I was really impressed that for them it was just an opportunity to talk as much as possible about a subject and then watch poor old Randy the translator desperately try to translate tech. There was also an N355 10GBE motherboard. This is something we're waiting for at the moment. It's taking advantage of the new Twin Lake CPU, so there is a 10G version of that board in development, and alongside it having a PCIe slot that isn't shared with the 2 M.2s, it's got 5 gig USB-C, blah, but it's got 10GBE, but it also has those 2 SFF ports there to fan out towards 8 hard drive bays. Then there was the W680 MATX board that has ECC memory, support of Gen 12, 13 and 14 CPUs from Intel. Again, ECC not so sure. 3 M.2 slots. It had a USB 4 port there. It had 10GBE, a ×16 PCIe slot and a ×4, supporting up to 12 SATA ports with those 3 SFF ports there. There was even a new AMD MITX motherboard with 2 10Gs there on board using the AQC controller, and again PCIe and those 2 SFFs fanning out up to a potential 8 SATA bays. It went on, it went on, it went on. And that's really it. Shortly after that, I made my way, said goodbye to everyone. They gave me a few samples that I'm going to talk about on the channel very, very soon. And that was really it. So what were my impressions of the tour? Well, number one, as mentioned earlier in the video, I'm not that naive. I know we are visiting a production facility. They knew I was coming. They're going to do the shiniest version of events. But there wasn't a huge amount of notice. Approximately around 2 weeks, if you're lucky. There's not that much you can do in 2 weeks to change workstations, the floor, staffing, production lines. And although no doubt they did enhance things for a visitor, I still was quite confident in what I saw in the production line. Now, another thing that was highlighted there when I was in the research and development was this relationship they have with Jonsbo. Now, in that room, and they didn't really highlight this too much, there was Jonsbo products all over the gaff. When I kind of looked into it and sort of looked around and asked Randy to sort of translate some things that were around me, it became very clear that CWWK and Jonsbo seem to be quite heavily connected. Now, we've used Jonsbo cases quite a lot in NAS compares, but also we recommend them. They're a really, really good NAS case. And it kind of was quite pleasing to know these two brands are working that closely together. But I still don't know why that isn't more publicly established, if that is the case, whether it is an informal relationship or a formal relationship. If anything, if I was to make recommendations for a budget DIY NAS solution and you asked me what case to get, I would always recommend a Jonsbo, really, if you're looking to save a bit of bunts and get a large-scale NAS scale-out desktop solution. And if you were to ask me an affordable board from China, I probably would highlight CWWK or Topton. Now, the relationship between CWWK and Topton was one that I asked a few times, and the answers I got were relatively mixed. I got the impression they didn't really want me to talk about that here in a video, but I will say I got everything they were leading towards, that CWWK is the production, and one of their contractors, one of their connections is Topton. But again, we're going to have to take that with a giant grain of salt, because we don't know for certain. Ultimately, the big takeaway for me visiting the facility was I was always quite keen on their products anyway, and nothing I saw today made me think less of that. What I saw was how the products are being developed. It's done, from what I can see, as good as I've seen it done in any other facility I've seen thus far, both in Taiwan and one that I visited in Hong Kong as well. Now, do I think they own the IP and the R&D and they've developed these in-house? I do. Do I think that both of the buildings belong to them? I'm not convinced. I think the second one definitely does. The first one, I think it's probably a larger contractor and maybe they lease out the floors when they need them, but ultimately that is probably their permanent production facility. Do I think the staff there are happy? Do I think it is running ethically? I can't really say. I think so. As much as you can with anything. This could be a factory in Bolton that makes spanners, and you've got to ask the question, how much can a visitor actually learn in just a few hours? Ultimately, has this visit made me to want to continue recommending Changwan products? Yes, I think it has. At least it's shown to me it's not a vapor company, and it's not just an email address and one bunch of people. There's actually 10 different companies at once. I think this is one standalone company, and when you are dealing with a CWWK product, you are talking to dedicated CWWK personnel. But if you're not going to be convinced by that, I don't think a video like this was ever going to help you anyway. But this has been a description and basically a story about my visit to a NAS production line facility here in Shenzhen, China. Once again, thank you so much for CWWK to not only answer my emails and allow me to have such unfettered access to your facilities, but I'm going to say it right now, Randy, you sir worked harder than anyone else that day. Thank you so much for all of your help. Now, if you want to learn more, hopefully a written article is going to be out very, very soon. I recommend you check that out. It will be linked below. Apart from that, if you've got any other questions, you can email me. You know my email address. It's robbie@thewebsite. Otherwise, there's the comments below, but comments generally, because we put so many videos out, can get lost in the quagmire. So if you have real questions, I would recommend emailing, to be honest, because although my email replies aren't going to be the quickest, I'm more likely to reply there. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.